Hi everyone, welcome to this video. Now in this video, we're going to be going over QA best practices. How do we go about the process of testing our applications to capture bugs early? And how do we know that our applications are ready to go live? Let's jump into this one and get started. When we're building out our applications, it's really important to have a rigorous and thorough testing process. It allows us to capture bugs earlier in the development process, which saves us time and reduces the amount of rework which we have to complete. There are two types of testing, being unit testing and regression testing. To break them down in a little bit more detail, unit testing is the process of testing out a small piece of functionality. To give you an example, just say that we've built out a messaging module. As soon as we've built out this module, we want to go through the process of testing it and just making sure that that functionality works as expected. On the other hand, we have regression testing, which we do at the end of our build. And what we do is we test our application from end to end just to make sure that it is working, it's functional, and it's stable. It also allows us to make sure that the flow between all the components that we completed unit testing on makes sense and there aren't any unintended breaks before going live. Now in this video, we're going to be going over the best practices for both unit testing and for regression testing. We're going to start first with unit testing and just go over some of the principles that should be used when you are completing unit testing. And then we're going to be going over regression testing and just go over the need to use a checklist and how to build out a checklist to make sure that you complete regression testing in a really thorough way. Let's jump into our editor and get started on unit testing. To give you a context of the application we've been building, it's a marketplace application with buyers on one side who can purchase products being provided by sellers. What we are on is a dashboard page where a seller can view all the products that they have and they can add additional products via this pop-up. And what we've just done is we've completed the functionality to save a new product. So when you click Save Changes, you save a product into your product list and that will be displayed to buyers on our platform. So what we want to do is we want to test that this piece of functionality actually works. So let's jump over to the preview page so that we can actually test that this component has been set up correctly. Now, as we go through this testing process, I want to teach you the first principle of unit testing, which is to test in a non-linear fashion. So when we build, we have an expected user story or flow that is to be followed. So in this example, the expected user story or flow, which we test, is the user clicks on new and a product appears. We then write the product information being like trail bike. We add a description being this is a trail bike. It comes in multiple colors. We add a price of 3,500, for example. We'll upload the image. And now what we do is we click Save Changes. We receive an error alert and I can see my product is appearing here. And in a normal setting of testing, I would look at this and go, okay, everything is working as expected. There aren't any bugs. But that's because we tested in a linear fashion going over a user story that we defined ourselves. This is how we expect a user to interact with our app. But in reality, a user may not follow this exact same process and may try to complete things that we don't expect. So what they might do in this example is now that they've added one product, they might try and add a second product. And if I click on new and try to add another product, I can see that the initial product details are here. I haven't actually reset my pop-up when I click the button new. And that's a bug that I need to capture and also now resolve. And the way that I would resolve that is if I go to my workflows, when button new is clicked, I would reset a group pop-up being pop-up products. But this is just an example of why it's so important to test in a non-linear fashion, because users don't always follow the story or the expected flow that you have. Jumping back to the preview page here, let's go over principle 2, which is to test inputs by entering the wrong data. So if we try to add a new product, and I will call this trail road bike. So it's a multi-purpose bike. What I want to do is I want to see if we can enter incorrect data and if this will be captured by our application. So one thing that we might try is to add a really long title. So if I go like this and I just add a really long title and I see if this is saved or if an error message comes up. Another thing that might occur is I might accidentally add a negative price. So I might go 500 negative, and I don't want that either. Now I'll put a dummy description for now, and I'll also add in an image as well, and I'll click Save Changes. What I can see is that this information has actually been saved, and I don't want a really long title to appear here as it completely throws off the way my products are displayed. Additionally, we shouldn't have negative numbers or negative prices to be allowed on our application. So if we jump back to here, we need to add limits to this. So for the input name, we want to limit the number of characters to just say 100. And this is just good practice in general, because again, on the description, we should also limit the number of characters to 500. We don't want overly long descriptions as it just throws off the look and the feel of our application. In terms of the price, we can actually set a range of a min and a max, and my minimum I want to be 0 so we don't have any negative numbers placed here. But this is just an example of why it's really important to make sure that when we're setting up our inputs, we don't want incorrect data to be captured. And what we need to do is to check if incorrect data could be added and then how we can actually limit a user from entering this. Now, going back to this preview page, I want to highlight our principle number 3, which is we always want to test with realistic data. So as I was adding new product data, I was always trying to use a name that might be reflective of what a real product would look like and upload images which are reflective of what a real product would look like. The reason why is we want the testing experience to be as close to the user experience as possible, so we can see little issues such as the way an image is formatted or the way the description is laid out, and make those changes as we're going along, because we do want our application to be tested in a manner which is reflective of how a user could use it. Now, the next principle that we're going to go over is to check mathematical results. And we're going to be using a different page in our application to check for this. So if I jump over here, we're on our checkout page. And being a marketplace application, we have the buyer who can add a product to cart and go to the checkout page. They'll click Buy Now, and that payment will be made to the seller, less an application fee. So if I jump over here, we can see that we charge a user using a saved credit card. And what happens in this scenario is the payee of the charge is the person who created the product, and then the application fee. So this is how much for us as the owner or the marketplace provider receives from the transaction. What we do is we get the current page's total price, we multiply it by search for app variables first items app fee. So what I've done, if I go to my data tab, is I have an app variable with the app fee saved. And if I go to my app location data and I go to my app variables, I can see my app fee is 0.1. So we take a 10% cut of every single sale that's made on my marketplace. What I want to do is I want to make sure that Bubble is actually calculating this correctly, because sometimes Bubble may round it in a funny way. So we always want to check our mathematical results. So if I go to my preview page, I can see that I have my road bike. I go to next step, I can click Pay Now, and now I can see that this order has been completed. What I want to do now is I want to check that it's been completed correctly. So if I jump back over to my database and I go to my all orders, I can see that we had a total price of 4,000 and then we have an app fee of 400. So what I always want to do is I just want to check in Google Sheets or in Excel that it's correct. So if I had the total price of 4,000, my app fee is 10%. I can just sanity check that this works correctly. Now this is a simple example, but we actually do quite complex mathematical evaluations in some applitions. And when you do them, it's really important to make sure that you double check your results using Excel, because we don't want to just blindly trust that Bubble is working in the way that we are expecting it to do. And we want to make sure that all the results are being rounded correctly. Now, the final principle of unit testing that I want to go over is principle 5, which is test responsiveness. So if I jump over to the preview here, this application looks great in terms of the design and the way things are laid out. But we are mimicking and testing as if the user is using our platform via a desktop. We want our application to still work great and look great, even if the user is using a different screen size width, such as a tablet or a mobile, to actually use and access our platform. So every time we are doing this unit testing, we want to test different screen sizes. So the way that we do that is we right click and click inspect to open up Chrome DevTools. And what we can do now is we can mimic different screen widths. So we can click on laptop, we can click on a more narrow laptop, we can go onto a tablet, and then we can actually mimic a mobile screen, and then we can look at how the pop-up looks under this mobile screen. So this is a really important aspect of unit testing, is to always make sure that we do test responsiveness. And just to summarize the 5 principles of unit testing before we jump over to the next section of this video. Principle 1 is to test in a non-linear fashion. So users won't always follow the expected flow that you have, so try different ways of testing. Test inputs by entering the wrong data. Users may put in information that we don't want to capture and we have to limit it. Always test with realistic data so that we ensure that the application really looks like and is being tested in a way that's as realistic as possible. Always check the mathematical results that Bubble calculates. We want to make sure that those results are correct, the order of operations is correct, so we use an Excel sheet or a Google sheet just to double check those results. And then finally, as we have just done, is we always want to test the responsiveness of our applications. Now what we want to do is we want to complete regression testing. The unit testing that we've done so far is about testing one component. With regression testing, it's about testing the entire application from end to end. And what we want to do is that we want to make sure it flows really nicely between all the components and that there aren't any unintended breaks or issues. Now, when we complete an end-to-end test, we want to be really clear in knowing what it is we are testing for so that we know our application has been thoroughly tested. A really great way of doing this is to build out a checklist which covers every piece of functionality that we're expecting and have to test for in our application. And the way that we build out this checklist is by going through the user stories, the user journeys, and also the scope document to build out this really robust checklist that we can go through and test for each of the components within this checklist. Now, as you go through this process of testing and you're checking off items on your checklist, you are likely going to encounter bugs. And when you encounter a bug, you should capture information about this bug, including how to recreate this bug so that you can resolve it later. And that's an important note to highlight. We want to capture all of the bugs in one place. And as we're going through the regression testing process, we don't want to stop and resolve the bug immediately. What we want to do is we want to capture all of our bugs in one place so that at the end of our regression test, we know exactly what bugs we have left and have to be completed before we can go live. And once we know this, we can go through the process of resolving these final bugs. Now, it can be helpful to use a tool versus capturing bugs manually. And one of the tools that we like to use is UserSnap, because it's really easy to add in a piece of code and integrate that into our Bubble application. And it just allows us to capture a snapshot of the bug and add a few lines so that we can easily recreate the bug when we go through the process of resolving all the bugs at the end of our regression testing. Do bear in mind there are other great tools on the market, so you can go through and integrate those into your Bubble app as you see fit. Now, what I want to do is to just give you an example of exactly how this one works. So let's jump over to the preview mode. To give you an example, just say I'm on this index page and this get started button doesn't work and it should link to the product search page. What I'll do is I'll submit feedback and I will click and drag to draw. So what this will do is it will tie this screenshot to the feedback. I can even click on the pen here and just make a little note of, all right, this is the button that's not working. I'll enter a task name being like fix get started button. I can describe the feedback in more detail and say link to product search page. And what this allows me to do is just to very easily and quickly and seamlessly capture feedback and capture bugs as I'm going through the process of testing. And this doesn't take me out of the flow of the entire end-to-end test. What's very useful is I have now gotten all the bugs that are in my application stored in one place. So once I've completed the testing, I can go through and resolve all of these bugs and have this tracking mechanism. It means that I'm not stopping and switching between testing and resolving bugs. Instead, we test the entire application and then we know exactly what is left, what needs to be done, and what we can actually prioritize as important feedback to be resolved as soon as possible.